So here I've got my ultrasonic cleaner. The tank's just filled with warm water. Got a glass. I'll just pop the rangefinder assembly in there. Fill that up with warm water. Add a couple of drops of dishwashing liquid. Stick that in the tank. Set my ultrasonic cleaner for 3 minutes. And let that rip. At the end of the 3 minutes, we'll come back and deal with it. That's that. Just take that out of there. Rinse it under the tap. Blow off all the excess moisture. Now I've got to take that away and deal with that with the hairdryer, blowing off all the moisture at the same time with the rubber bulb, so that no droplets dry on there, otherwise you end up with coffee rings. I'll be back when it's done. Well, I think you can see there that that glass is sparkly now. You can see the light glinting off it. That's what glass should look like. Nice and shiny, nice and sparkly. Before it had the transparency of a grey woolen blanket, but now it looks good. So we've got those pieces all cleaned up, and I can start reassembling the rangefinder. Alright, now with this all back nice and sparkly, let's carry on and finish the job. So first we need to take this cover off here, this little bracket that holds everything in place. Now, the piece of glass in the centre position, just make sure my tweezers are very clean. Make sure that the silvered lines are on the surface facing to the front. Pop that back in position. This metal mask goes behind that piece. And this retaining spring goes to the front. Convex side to the front. That'll hold that all in position. Our front piece of glass. Here I've got that all cleaned and ready to go, and I can see a fleck of dust on there. Let me blow that away. That's better. This mask needs to go on. It's got little folded down edges on the ends of this mask. It sort of clips in place like that. That goes on the concave side of that glass. The plain surface goes to the front. Now, the front piece, the piece of glass we've got in the front position here at the moment has got the small rectangle, not the large rectangle, and the silvered lines point to the rear, not to the front. And slide this in front of it, complete with its mask. And here we have this piece, this little plastic, it's a celluloid mask. It's got some marks in the corners of that clear frame in there. There should be 2 marks on the top, 1 mark at the bottom. That's your parallax correction marks. Make sure the 2 marks go to the top. The dull grey side of this faces forward, the shiny side faces back. Here's the second of these retaining springs. This is a heavier spring than the other one. Slide that into place. So now our front groups are held firmly in position. We're going to have to lock the position of these in place with a touch of lacquer before we're finished. Otherwise, there's a danger that this front grip can move this way or that way, and a slight movement throws out your rangefinder image. Okay, so we got that part done. The rear or eyepiece lens of this is here. I've cleaned that. Now the convex side goes in. The outside here, the piece to the rear, is almost flat. It gets slightly concave, but it's virtually flat. That goes to the outside, that surface. I'll put the mask on the back and do the retaining screw up. So the viewfinder part here is assembled. That's all I need to see. So I'm going to look out the window, and surprise, surprise, it's like looking out the window. It's nice and clear. You can see right through that. It has no longer got that grey haze. So the job, basically, we're on the home straight now. Alright, so the prism. Here's the prism. We need to clean this. The prism has 3 glass air surfaces. The 2 you see here and the one down in the tube. So a little touch of glass cleanup on the cotton bud. I'll clean these surfaces. Now these surfaces look quite good. They're quite clean. And I think I mentioned at the start that the little diamond shaped patch was bright and clear. Everything else was grey and unclear. Now here all I did to clean the remaining surface down there was poke a cotton bud down in there, swirl it all about, then do the same with the dry end. Take your rocket blower, blow out any threads of cotton that you might have left down there, and check to see what it looks like, and that all looks pretty good to me. That can go in place. And that face obviously faces to the front. I'll put its 2 screws in position. Oh, it's playing hard to get. Alright, just run that, just get that started, and I'll find the right size screwdriver. That one's just slightly too wide to follow the screw head down into the channel. This screwdriver's better. Now I'm just pressing that prism home. This front face of the prism needs to be parallel with the front of the rangefinder, basically. That looks pretty good. It's a good starting position. We need to adjust that later anyway. Right, so that part is done. Need to deal with the arm now. On the arm we've got this little bush, this little brass or bronze bush, and normally I'll put a little scratch across it and the arm so that I can tell where it's at, and I can put it back in the same position. Now the bush is circular, nothing odd there as far as I know, but because it's got a slot in it, it means that it's not quite a neat circle, and so it might act like a slight eccentric. So I'm cleaning these surfaces here with a bit of naphtha on a cotton bud, just to make sure there's no old dried sticky grease there. You can see from the colour of that there was a bit of dirt there. Get that all off, get that clean. Do the same with this little brass bush. Here's the retaining nut, and we have the screw and the wavy washer. So I'm just giving them a wipe too, make sure they're clean. That's all my pieces clean. Now we can assemble some of this. I'm going to find some lubricant. Okay, some lubricant. Now you can use just about anything. I could use that Inox MX6 synthetic. That works quite well. What I tend to do instead is I use some molybdenum paste, which has the advantage that very little of it is required, and it's not wet and sticky and doesn't have a tendency to accumulate dust. Accumulating dust and grease and lubricants makes them act like a grinding compound instead of a lubricant. Let's put the bush back in here. I've got my little alignment marks here made. Drop that in, rotate that alignment mark lines up. That's fine. This is a little glass lens. It needs to be clean. I'll clean that with glass cleaner, just like before. Okay, that looks good. That arm can go back on the rangefinder. This is where it gets a bit tricky. Here is the nut. It has to drop into the inside of this slot here. So with a pair of curved jaw tweezers, I grab it, reach in and drop it into the slot. At least that's the idea. I don't know where that went. Let me see if I can find out. It might be sitting in position. I've got a little jig here to help me position these things. Let's see if it helps me today. Oh, there's the nut. It's flipped upside down and it's jammed in the slot. So let's retrieve that. And start again. I think I'd better luck that time and see if the jig will sit on there. It will. If I flip it upside down, I can see here's the nut protruding through here. I'll just change this camera battery. Of course, you might count having a jig like this as cheating. I suppose it is cheating. But I'll show you how I put this together with the jig. I can just slide that onto there. Find my wavy washer. If I'm feeling enthusiastic, I'll give that a little wipe either side with the molybdenum paste. Sit the wavy washer over around the bush. Take the screw, drop that in, get that started, and run it down with a pair of tweezers. Don't have to get it very tight, I just want to take up the slack basically. That's good. Now I want to check and make sure that I've got it aligned correctly here. I'll slacken it off slightly and just move this arm back. I can see my alignment mark right here. So I'll bring that arm forward until it just comes to it. Take my pair of tweezers. Put that up tight. Then I'll take my pin. Take this off the jig. If I swing this out like this, it means I can get to that spring and put the pin through the loop in the spring. Like that. And I've just got to stretch it out into position, drop it in, and now the arm is sprung loaded. Everything's back in position. And now I'm going to look out the window and see what I can see. Well, I had to look out the window. The horizontal alignment is very, very good, as far as I can tell. The vertical alignment is well off. So I'm just going to check, and my moving image is low. Because the moving image is low, I need to adjust the position of these two screws to change the angle of this prism. So I slacken that one at the back, tighten the one at the front, and see what I get. It's the right direction, but I haven't gone far enough. So I slacken off this one at the back, tighten the one at the front, check again. That's pretty close. That's so close I probably wouldn't muck with that until I've got this thing in the camera and I'm doing the final adjustment of the rangefinder. So that's the rangefinder reassembled. Now I'll show you, if you don't have a clever jig like this, and who would have, because I made that myself and I've never seen one before, how would you go about putting that arm back on the rangefinder? Well, let's take it apart again and I'll show you. This is the way I did it for years and years and years, because I'm a bit slow and I never got around to doing anything better. Take the screw out. So we've got the nut, that's loose. I'll slide that into position, reaching in with my tweezers. These are curved tweezers. They're ideal for that job. It allows me to sort of reach around the corner. Then what I would do is I would take a large screwdriver, pop that through the hole on the top here, and that will support that. Now I'm just going to have to change this because we can see virtually nothing here. That'll do. And you can probably see here that the bush is supported from underneath by my screwdriver under there. So that makes this a little bit precarious and it's a bit awkward. But as I say, it does work. So, I'll put the arm in place like that. Check that I've got the screw pretty much lined up. Get it started in the bush. No, it's not playing the game today. Oh look, I've disturbed this now. Let's put that back where it came from. I'll just get a better viewpoint on this. No, there's the bush all right. That's it. Once it's tightened up even a little bit, you're good to go. Come on camera, hurry up and focus. Alright, so sliding that arm down to that scribed mark. Just tighten those screws up, that's a screw up. And I'm going to use this tool to do the job, to really nip it up tight. That all feels good. Take my spring, pin, get it through the spring, stretch the pin out. That's all good. Check that I haven't disturbed too much. That all looks good. So that rangefinder is pretty much ready to go back in the camera. But first of all, I want to put a drop of lacquer here and here to make sure that that front group can't shift, because that would disturb the rangefinder setting, and I know that it's about right. Now here I'm using clear nail varnish from the local bargain shop. Just want to drop at the top and a drop at the bottom. Don't overdo it because I don't want it running along that front surface, but that'll be fine. That rangefinder can go back on the camera body. Okay, with the focus back at the infinity position, which moves this stud to the rear, put the rangefinder in position. And here I'm going to cheat. The rangefinder here is not pinned to the body, it's held with two screws. That means there's potential for a little bit of wiggle room or movement. What happens is that if the camera gets dropped, this can shift on the body, that'll change our settings. So I'm going to put a little touch of lacquer here and here, which will lock this in position. Once the screws are tight, it'll be reluctant to move. And normally I would use nice red lacquer there so everyone can see it. But I don't know where I've put it, so I'm not going to find it. Clear will do. It doesn't lock anything on there so securely that it won't move if you pull at it. Yeah, screws in there and it's started. Check that that arm's free. Yeah, it moves freely. Get the other screw in. Just drop these in from the top and if you're lucky they drop straight into position like that. Now normally I hold the body of the rangefinder back towards the back of the camera, nice and square against its post, and do those two screws up tight. See if I can wriggle this big screwdriver into those screw heads. I think the slot was is a bit tight. Try not to strip those screws out. You've got to work at it, but some people do. And then of course you've got no way of holding the rangefinder firmly to the body. So as I move the focus scale ring here, you'll see that the arm swings backwards or forwards. Forwards as I bring the camera to a close focus distance, and back towards the infinity position. So I'll have a quick look out the window and see how that looks. That's pretty good. I'm going to have to stand up. It's a dirty day here, so nothing's particularly clear. I'll see what I can find out. Okay, so my moving image in the finder, as I move this, one of the images moves and the other one's fixed. My moving image is slightly high. To deal with that, I need to slightly slacken the front screw here and tighten the rear screw. And these adjustments are very slight. It can be very frustrating doing this. Yeah, now my moving image is too low. I've got to go back the other way. What we're doing here is changing the angle of that prism. It's still low. Right, that's very good. And at the infinity position, the images are aligned in the rangefinder, are aligned perfectly. But they align before I get the focus right the way around to the infinity position, which means that the arm is coming back to its stop slightly early. So I need to make an adjustment here so that the arm is pulled slightly forward. And by pulling it slightly forward means that it only comes back right as the focus ring reaches infinity. And making this adjustment, like making the adjustment here for the vertical alignment, is time consuming and annoying. This screw, if you look down from the top, I can see 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 screws on that arm. The one on the end here is like a split nut. You can leave that alone. The one next to it, that's the adjustment for close focus adjustment. You can leave that alone. This one in the middle is our lock. I need to slacken that just slightly. it may be locked with a touch of lacquer. So that's just snug, it's not tight now. This is our adjustment screw here. Now that's an eccentric, and I think in this case if I rotate that very slightly clockwise, it will effectively change the angle of this arm on this piece. And I've just moved it very slightly. Now the annoyance with these sorts of things is that if you think you've moved it, you've probably moved it too far. They're very touchy. Let me have a look. What I'm trying to do is get my adjustment so that as I move the focus ring towards the infinity position, the images come together right at the point where the focus ring stops moving. And that's pretty much it there. I just need a little bit more, I think. And I'll lock it there and see what it's like, because sometimes when you lock it, it shifts, which is another annoyance. Yeah, it's coming, they're meeting slightly too early. As I say, the adjustments are exceptionally subtle. Don't be at all surprised if you spend half an hour backwards and forwards adjusting things, trying to get it right. That's it. So, at this point, I have a good, sharp viewfinder. The rangefinder images meet correctly at the infinity position. And if we're only coming in here to sort out the cloudy finder, we're done. That all looks good. Now you can put a touch of lacquer on those screws to lock that setting, though in practice I've never found that to be particularly necessary. I'm going to put the top cover back on here now. Hold one last check to make sure I've left no fingerprints on the rangefinder. It looks good. Put my top cover on. I think that's it. Let's check that the shutter releases nicely still. It does. Check that the top cover appears to be firmly in place, and it is. Get some screws in it. So, this camera, what have we achieved so far? Well, we sorted out the problem with the missing door hinge screw. That was a minor nuisance, but it could have become a major nuisance. There was a likelihood that something would jam or stick and the door would end up getting damaged. So by getting that hinge pin back in place, that sorted that issue out. The problem with the shutter release adjustment, the problem there was that it was not correctly adjusted so that the film advance was released and to allow you to wind on before the shutter had fired. I'll just bring this up, put something through the fork of the rewind here, stop it turning, take my rewind knob. Oh, where's the little shroud that goes over there first, and just spin that rewind on there. Check that that's a nice smooth two-stage action, and that's good. Rotate this all the way to the infinite, to clockwise, and this should be round so that the number 18 is towards the front of the camera. And I'll run that screw down and then check the position of the ASA scale. So I'll run that screw down. I'm not over tightening it at that point. I want to check the position, and there it is. That little tick mark next to the ASA 1300 here is right between the 18 and the 17. That's where it was when we started. So we haven't changed the position at all. It means that the meter is set as it was previously. We haven't made any adjustments to it. So we still haven't tested the meter to see whether it's particularly accurate. It may or may not be. At this stage we have a camera that's usable. It's quite nice to use. The meter's unchecked. It may or may not be accurate. The shutter works fine at 125th. That might be a little bit slow, that speed, but it's close enough probably. The 250th is probably likewise okay. The 500th, they were never for a 500th. That's probably quite slow. That's probably about a 300th. The 60th, that might be okay. Might be a bit slow. I wouldn't use any of the slower speeds. We know that the shutter in this camera needs to be serviced. But if you don't have the confidence to tear a shutter apart, getting it to this stage would give you a usable camera, and in daylight conditions with a shutter set to 125th, so if you're using an ISO 100 or 200 film, that should be more than adequate. So that's it for today. I think that the next thing we need to deal with this camera is the shutter, but that's one stage more complicated and we didn't need to go there today. Thanks for watching.